Who was Roboam, and why did his reign forever mark the history of Israel? If you don't know, the time has come to know the story of Solomon's successor on the throne of Israel. At the height of the kingdom of Israel, Rehoboam, the crown prince, was born, son of Solomon and grandson of the renowned King David. He grew up witnessing the glory of his father, who impressed the nations with wisdom and wealth. However, his own journey would be marked by challenges opposed to the grandeur of the past. Rehoboam's childhood was spent in the magnificent halls of the palace, among the wise counselors and the riches accumulated over the ages. But, even in the face of so much opulence, a shadow hovered over the young prince. Solomon, his father, had erected grandiose monuments, but he had also accumulated debts that weighed on the kingdom. Rehoboam, upon reaching adolescence, began to question his progenitor's choices. The wisdom that previously seemed unquestionable now found itself challenged by the murmurings of the people. The prince, in his heart, longed to understand the balance between greatness and responsibility. One day, while walking through the lush palace gardens, Rehoboam met a wise old man, a trusted advisor to his grandfather David. This man, with deep wrinkles carved by time, noticed the restlessness in the young prince's eyes. Rehoboam, heir to a noble lineage, wisdom is a double-edged blade. Your father raised monuments to glory, but forgot the simplicity that keeps a kingdom strong. The people long for justice, not just grandeur. These words echoed in Rehoboam's mind, like seeds sown in fertile soil. The prince began to contemplate his role not just as heir to a throne, but as the future ruler of a people crying out for equity. As the kingdom flourished around him, Rehoboam immersed himself in the elders' teachings, absorbing wisdom not found in the palace's ornate halls. The seed of questioning had germinated, and the crown prince began to envision a different path, a path of responsibility and justice. Thus, Rehoboam's youth was strengthened by the promise of a leader who would not only inherit the greatness of his past, but also shape the future of the kingdom with the wisdom of someone who understands the true essence of power, the ability to serve the people with justice and humility. Rehoboam's coronation marked the beginning of a new era for Israel, but the kingdom's destiny was about to take an irreversible turn. Under the weight of the crown, the young heir king faced crucial choices that would shape the course of his people's history. Rehoboam, newly installed on the throne, found himself facing a nation eager for change. The shadow of the debts accumulated by his father hung over the kingdom, while the northern tribes waited expectantly for the new monarch's decisions. The elder's wise voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that greatness must be tempered with responsibility. Rehoboam's reign began under the shadow of discontent that hung over the kingdom of Israel. His father, Solomon, had left a legacy of oppressive policies, marked by heavy taxes and forced labor. Upon assuming the throne, Rehoboam found himself facing monumental challenges, where his responses would irreversibly shape the destiny of Israel. The royal palace resounded with murmurs of dissatisfaction. The people, weighed down by the burdens left by Solomon, anxiously waited for Rehoboam to alleviate such suffering. The new king, however, in his youth and inexperience, underestimated the gravity of the situation. At a royal council, experienced counselors presented to Rehoboam the need to ease the burden that weighed on the people. If today you are a servant of this people, and serve them, and answer them, speak good words to them, they will be your servants every day. 1 Kings 12:7. However, influences from inexperienced young people whispered in his ears, urging him to maintain a rigid stance and maintain tributes, believing that authority should be unquestionable. And the young man who had grown up with him said to him, "This is what you will say to this people who spoke to you. Your father made our yoke very heavy, but you eased it from us. This is what you will say to him. My little finger is thicker than my father's loins." 1 Kings 12:10. Indecision settled in the king's heart. Tension was growing in the northern lands, where Jeroboam, a former officer of Solomon, was emerging as the leader of an imminent revolt. Northern representatives, seeking relief from taxation, sent a delegation to Rehoboam, pleading for a change in oppressive policies. The king's response would be decisive for the future unity of the kingdom. Rehoboam, in his indecision, called a royal assembly. Before the representatives of the people, he heard the demands and pleas for justice. Pressure weighed heavily on his shoulders as the choice between continued oppression and the possibility of restoring harmony lay before him. Upon hearing the demands, Rehoboam pondered, oscillating between the desire to maintain unquestionable authority and the understanding that justice and equity were fundamental pillars for Israel's stability. The king, however, responded with disdain and arrogance. His words, instead of calming tensions, inflamed tempers. "My father burdened you with heavy burdens, but I will burden you even more. My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. My authority will not be questioned." Rehoboam's words echoed like thunder, unleashing a storm of discontent among the northern tribes. Jeroboam, seeing the king's refusal to meet legitimate demands, raised the banner of revolt. Tension was rising in the northern lands, led by Jeroboam, a former officer of Solomon who had become the spokesman for the revolt. The tribes cried out for relief, for a change in the oppressive policies that had eroded the kingdom's harmony. Rehoboam's arrogance was like sparks in a powder keg. Revolt broke out, and the northern tribes united under the leadership of Jeroboam. The division of the kingdom became inevitable, unfolding before the young king's eyes. The division of the kingdom was sealed, Israel to the north and Judah to the south. The words that God had spoken to Jeroboam through the mouth of the prophet Ahijah in 1 Kings chapter 11 were fulfilled here. Rehoboam's choices echoed like a sentence, separating what was previously united. The revolt of the northern tribes laid the foundation for a period of turmoil and division, marking Rehoboam's reign as a dark chapter in Israel's history. The challenges Rehoboam faced were not only political but also moral. His hasty and dismissive decision precipitated the fall of a unified kingdom, leaving deep scars in Israel's history. The people would expand, but no longer under the aegis of a single crown. The name Rehoboam, which meant the people expand, seemed an ironic prophecy given the complex circumstances surrounding his government. Born into an intricate environment, Rehoboam found himself immersed not only in political challenges, but also in a context permeated by idolatrous practices and family complexities. From the beginning, Rehoboam's life was intertwined with the shadows of his father Solomon's choices. Solomon, despite his wisdom, fell into the trap of idolatry and maintained a vast harem that defied established principles. The palace, rather than being a haven of stability, was a cauldron of intrigue and rivalry between the many wives and concubines. Rehoboam, still young, absorbed the atmosphere full of tension and complexity. Every corridor in the palace echoed with secrets and suppressed sighs. Among the shadows of idolatrous practices, the crown prince sought to understand his role in this intricate game of power and passions. His heart, however, remained restless. The idolatrous practices that permeated the palace clashed with the education he had received on the fundamental principles of his faith. The duality between the name he bore and the complex environment that surrounded him became a burden on his young shoulders. On his lonely nights, Rehoboam sought guidance from the teachings of his grandfather David. He contemplated the sacred scriptures and sought discernment amidst the complexity that surrounded him. The duality of his name became a constant challenge, a battle between the expansion of the people and the constraints of the practices that oppressed them. Faced with his father's inheritance, Rehoboam decided in his heart to find a balance. He longed to lead not only with political wisdom, but also to restore the purity of faith that had shaped the foundations of his people. The task, however, was monumental, for the roots of idolatry ran deep, intertwined in the corridors of power and palace tradition. As the years passed, Rehoboam immersed himself in a process of self-discovery and redemption. He saw himself as a link between the past of extravagance and idolatry and the future he longed to build for his people. His name, which initially seemed ironic, began to acquire a new meaning, not just as a promise, but as a personal journey of expansion and renewal. Thus the chapter on the complexity of Rehoboam's name and environment unfolded like an intricate tapestry, woven with the choices, challenges, and aspirations of a leader destined to confront not only political issues, but also the deepest dilemmas of the human heart. Rehoboam's reign advanced, but not without challenges and shadows that hung over the kingdom of Judah. As he sought to fortify his borders militarily, the king's spiritual journey quickly deteriorated. Idolatry, like a weed, spread its deep roots, provoking God's wrath upon the earth. At the height of his ambitions for power, Rehoboam found himself immersed in practices that challenged the fundamental principles of his faith. The altars erected in honor of foreign gods became a macabre shadow on the spiritual horizon of Judah. The people, who had already faced the consequences of the oppressive policies of the past, now found themselves confronted with a new threat, the spiritual distance from their leader. As arsenals were built and walls fortified, Rehoboam's heart turned further and further from the true source of power. The warnings of the prophets echoed like the powerless wind in the face of the king's spiritual deafness. Idolatry, like a whirlwind, swept away the spiritual integrity of the kingdom. It was at this dark moment that a storm announced itself. Shishak, the pharaoh of Egypt, led an invasion that would plunge Judah into humiliation. The armies advanced, bringing with them not only the threat of destruction, but also the manifestation of divine wrath upon a people who had strayed from the path of righteousness. The battle that unfolded was more than a military conflict. It was proof of Rehoboam's spiritual choices. The pagan altars erected on holy land cried out for divine justice. The fortified walls, in their earthly grandeur, were no match for the heavenly justice that hovered over Judah. Partial destruction was avoided, but humiliation was imminent. The treasures accumulated over the ages, symbols of wealth and power, were forced to surrender in the face of invasion. Rehoboam, on his throne of gold and ivory, found himself faced with the naked reality of his political and economic fragility. By handing over the treasures, the king of Judah not only lost material riches, but also faced the harsh reality of the spiritual consequences of his choices. The humiliation, like an exposed wound, marked not only the king, but the entire kingdom. The eyes of the people now reflected not only political discontent, but also spiritual disappointment. This dark chapter in Rehoboam's story served as a brutal reminder that a kingdom's true strength lies not just in its stone walls, but in the spiritual integrity of its leaders. The humiliation, although painful, was a call to reflection and repentance, an opportunity for Rehoboam to reevaluate his priorities and seek restoration not only of earthly treasures, but of the divine fellowship he had lost. The last chapters of Rehoboam's reign unfolded like a scroll full of ups and downs, a tumultuous narrative of internal and external challenges that would leave indelible marks on the history of Judah. The king, in his career, experienced a complex mix of successes and failures, outlining a legacy that would be remembered not only for its triumphs, but also for its failures. The royal palace, now marked by the scars of the invasion led by Shishak, witnessed a Rehoboam who sought to rebuild not only the fallen walls, but also the spiritual integrity that had been shaken. The gold and ivory that once reflected wealth now served as silent witnesses to the kingdom's vulnerability. Amid the ruins, Rehoboam faced internal challenges. The northern tribes, now separated, maintained latent discontent, an open wound that threatened the fragile stability of Judah. The king, aware of his responsibility, sought ways to unify the people, but the divisions were deep, rooted in past choices. However, amidst the shadows, moments of clarity emerged. Rehoboam, although he was not a king completely committed to the Lord's commandments, demonstrated obedience at critical moments. His search for wise counsel and his willingness to listen to the experienced voices in his royal council showed a glimmer of wisdom in a reign often marked by impulsiveness. Fidelity to God, even if wavering, proved crucial. Amidst the struggles and temptations of idolatry that haunted the kingdom, Rehoboam found the strength to turn to the Lord for guidance. His tumultuous relationship with faith walked a fine line between spiritual decay and potential restoration. The final years of Rehoboam's reign saw a sincere attempt to reverse the damage caused by reckless choices. Rebuilding the walls was more than a physical task. It was a symbol of spiritual renewal. The pagan altars were torn down, and efforts were made to purify the cult. However, Rehoboam's legacy would remain tumultuous. The king, despite his belated efforts, was unable to completely eradicate the shadows that hung over his reign. Divisions between north and south persisted, and the people's confidence was shaken. As his days came to an end, Rehoboam looked back, contemplating a reign marked by ups and downs, by mistakes and redemption. His legacy served as a warning, not only about the consequences of impulsive choices, but also about the importance of wisdom, humility, and faithfulness to God in leadership. The golden twilight illuminated the last days of Rehoboam, casting long shadows over a reign that was marked by challenges, redemptions, and, above all, the constant search for a path in the ways of the Lord. The halls of the palace echoed like stories of an era coming to an end, as the king, now aged and reflective, faced the inevitable outcome of his journey. In the throne hall, Rehoboam contemplated the legacy he would leave behind. The walls bore witness to the ups and downs of a kingdom in constant struggle, a narrative that had unfolded like a turbulent epic in the pages of Israel's history. The gold and ivory that once symbolized power lost their value under the weight of choices made over the years. As Rehoboam neared the end of his life, he reflected not only on the challenges he faced, but also on the opportunities missed and lessons learned. The tumultuous journey, marked by revolt, humiliation, and partial redemption, now reached an inevitable conclusion. As the last rays of the sun shone in the sky, the city of David prepared to welcome the last king of an age. Rehoboam was buried in the shadows of the walls that witnessed his rise and fall. His tomb, a landmark in the city that was once ruled by his grandfather David, symbolized the closing of a chapter in Israel's history. His son, Abijah, assumed the throne, beginning a new phase in the kingdom's trajectory. As parting tears were shed over Rehoboam's tomb, the transition of power marked not only the end of an era, but also the beginning of an unknown era, with challenges and promises yet to be revealed. Rehoboam's reign left indelible marks on the biblical pages, serving as a reminder of the complexities inherent to leadership and the consequences of straying from the Lord's ways. His story, a testimony of ups and downs, of crucial choices and partial redemptions, would resonate for generations as a reminder that leadership, even in the hands of the most powerful, is permeated by an intrinsic fragility. As Rehoboam's tomb lay silently in the city of David, his memory echoed through the ages, reminding all who listened of the lessons learned in a reign that, although tumultuous, contributed to the rich tapestry of Israel's history. Thus, the final chapter closed, but the pages turned would continue to influence those who were willing to read the lessons inscribed in the experiences of the king who faced the challenges and deviations of a turbulent era.